Dwight David Eisenhower was the 34th President of the United States. His 8 years as president were a time of peace and prosperity. He was a man who became president because of a sense of duty, not because he lusted for political power or fame. On October 14, 1890, in Denison, Texas, David Jacob Eisenhower and Ida Stover were blessed with a new baby boy who they named David Dwight Eisenhower. When this baby got a little older, they decided to change the order of his name so that there wasn't two Davids in the family. So he was known as Dwight David Eisenhower. Dwight had 6 brothers: Arthur, Edgar, Roy, Earl, Milton, and Paul. His brother Paul died when he was very young. Since there were no girls in the family, the boys learned how to cook, clean, and do other women jobs. While Eisenhower was in the army, many soldiers talked about how excited they got when they knew General Eisenhower was cooking dinner. Dwight was very close to his older brother Edgar, who was called Big Ike. Since they were inseparable, Dwight got the nickname Little Ike, which stuck throughout his life. Once, when Ike was 14, he fell while running and skinned his knee. He got a serious infection and doctors wanted to amputate it, but Edgar would not let them, and a few weeks later Dwight miraculously healed fine. When it was time for the boys to go to college, the family did not have the money to send them, so Dwight worked and helped pay for his dear brother Edgar to go. The Eisenhower family was very religious. They were conservative Mennonites that didn't believe in violence and war, which is ironic since Dwight grew up to be such a powerful general. Dwight said that he stayed religious his entire life. He just didn't associate with a certain religion. While in school, Dwight was an average student. His favorite subjects were geometry and reading. He was an excellent athlete and was a star baseball and football player. He had a friend that told him that it was free to go to school if he joined the military, so he tried to join the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, but found out that he was too old. So he went to the military academy in West Point, New York, where he played football until he suffered a knee injury. After graduation, Eisenhower was promoted to second lieutenant at Fort Houston in Texas. He met and married Mamie Dowd on July 1, 1916. They had 2 sons, Dowd Dwight, also known as Icky, and John Sheldon Dowd. John grew up to become a famous Army officer like his father, but baby Icky died at the age of 3. Up until the day he died, Eisenhower sent Mamie flowers on baby Icky's birthday, and he is known for saying, "There is no tragedy in life like the death of a child. Things never get back to the way they were." Eisenhower was known as a solid leader with good organizational skills, and was promoted to captain at Camp Cole in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There he taught soldiers how to use tanks in battle. He was a good teacher, but he wanted to see combat. His group was finally being sent to France right when the First World War was ending, and Eisenhower was very disappointed that he didn't get to fight in the war. In 1922, he was sent to the Panama Canal Zone in Central America, where he served on the staff of General Fox Connor, who taught Eisenhower about military history and strategies. After serving under General Connor, Eisenhower enrolled in the Army War College and graduated at the top of his class. Another important leader who heard about Eisenhower was General Douglas MacArthur. He was the military advisor in the Philippines. Eisenhower and MacArthur worked to build a strong army and prepare the Philippine nation for independence. After 4 years there, Eisenhower left a lieutenant. It was 1939 and World War II had begun. General George C. Marshall was the Army Chief of Staff, and he had heard about Eisenhower's war games. Eisenhower's war games helped teach troops how to plan strategy for war. George Marshall was so impressed that he appointed Eisenhower the head of War Plans Division. In June of 1942, Eisenhower was put in charge of U.S. forces in Europe. He planned Operation Overlord, which was to have troops leave England, go across the English Channel, and land on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. It was the largest seaborne invasion in history, and it became known as D-Day. The Allied troops pushed the German troops back, and France was finally secure, which was the major victory for the Allies. After success in Europe, Eisenhower came home one of the most famous war heroes. He wrote many books and was offered the job of president of Columbia University in New York City. Communism was on the rise, so President Truman and many Western European nations formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Truman chose Eisenhower as commander of NATO forces. North Korea invaded South Korea Korea, and U.S. troops were sent to help. In 1952, Eisenhower and Richard Nixon ran together as Republican candidates for president and vice president. Eisenhower ended up beating the Democrat candidate Adlai Stevenson with 442 electoral college votes to his 89 for the presidency. One of his first moves as president was to end the Korean War, which he did in July of 1953. He used the threat of his powerful nuclear weapons. He thought that a big supply of nuclear weapons would prevent another world war. He was quoted saying, "The only way to win World War III is to prevent it." Communism was still on the rise, and many people feared it was going to spread to U.S. soil. Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin claimed that communists were working in the State Department and military. He had no proof, but put fear into the minds of Americans, as shown in the political cartoon on the right. Eisenhower did not like McCarthy's witch hunt, but just ignored him. Even though he had a successful first term, Eisenhower did not know if he wanted to run for a second because of his health and age. He suffered a mild heart attack, but the doctor said he was healthy enough to run for a second term, which he did. He again beat Adlai Stevenson for the presidency. During his second term, Eisenhower faced many challenges with the U.S. He was trying to enforce fair treatment for African Americans. Many schools were still segregated and said that their facilities were separate but equal, which was not true most of the time. In the 1954 case of Brown versus Board of Education, schools were ordered to integrate. There was an incident in Little Rock, Arkansas, where the governor tried to stop integration and had the National Guard stand and keep black students out. President Eisenhower, who was their superior boss, stepped in and redirected the National Guard to keep the peace and protect these African American students. On October 1957, Russia won the race to space by launching the first object, Sputnik 1. It was that year that Eisenhower signed a law creating NASA. In order to stop the spread of communism, Congress approved Eisenhower's doctrine in 1957. It stated that the U.S. would give money and military aid to any country fighting the spread of communism. Under this policy, the U.S. sent troops to Lebanon, Taiwan, and China within the first year. President Eisenhower supported Richard Nixon to be his successor on the presidency, but he was beat out by Democrat John F. Kennedy. Eisenhower then retired and moved back to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania with his wife, where he worked on his golf game and wrote books. Occasionally, other presidents still called him for advice. Eisenhower suffered a heart attack and died on March 28 of 1965. And just to further the point that Eisenhower loved his country, his last words were, "I've always loved my wife. I've always loved my children. I've always loved my grandchildren. And I've always loved my country."